My son put a $180,000 loan in front of me and said, "A real father signs." Before I go any further, tell me where you're watching from in the comments and subscribe to the channel. The signature on page 14 already carried my name. Eric had invited me to his restaurant before the dinner staff arrived, then placed the loan packet between two empty water glasses. He turned directly to the commercial guarantee and tapped the line beneath my forged signature. "The bank needs you to confirm it," he said. "That is all." I looked at the amount printed above the signature, $180,000. The obligation included collection costs, late fees, and permission to pursue my assets if Eric's restaurant failed. It did not describe a father helping his son through a difficult season. It described a creditor reaching my retirement. "When did I sign this?" I asked. Eric leaned back and folded his arms. "Do not make this dramatic. The restaurant closes without that money." "When?" "Last month. You told me you would always stand behind me." The date beside my name fell on a Sunday morning. At that hour, I had been inside Local 38's Union Hall, reading the names of 6 electricians who died during the previous year. 43 people saw me there. Eric knew because he had declined my invitation. I turned another page and found a telephone number listed as mine. The area code belonged to our city, but the final 4 digits did not belong to any phone I had owned. That was the anomaly. A bank had approved my guarantee after contacting a stranger and hearing someone claim to be me. I closed the folder. "Take the evening," Eric said. "Call me after you remember what family means." I carried the packet home inside the certified envelope that had exposed it that morning. Then I called the bank, requested every preserved verification record, and learned that one recorded conversation stood between my son and the money. At closing, Eric would hear that voice again. He would also learn why I had allowed him to believe his loan remained alive. "My name is Howard Bennett, and I worked as a union electrician for 41 years before retiring at 67. Electricity teaches respect for invisible consequences. A loose connection can remain hidden behind a wall until heat reaches dry wood, while a mislabeled breaker can send another man into a circuit he believes is dead. We treated labels as promises. My father taught me the trade inside old apartment buildings where cloth-covered wire crumbled between your fingers. He never owned a company, drove a new truck, or called himself an entrepreneur. He carried excellent tools. When I completed my apprenticeship, he gave me a leather tool roll containing 6 screwdrivers, 2 pliers, a folding roll, and a voltage tester. His initials were burned into the flap with a soldering iron. "A tool remembers the hand," he said. I used that roll until the leather became too thin for job sites, then kept it above my workbench. Eric grew up watching me clean those tools every Friday night. He wanted a different life. My wife Marian and I had 1 child. And Eric learned early that being our only son made every ambition sound like a family project. He sold candy door to door at 9, repaired bicycles at 14, and ran a campus food stand during college. He could make people believe movement meant progress. I admired that gift because it was foreign to me. On construction sites, progress had measurements, inspections, and drawings with revision dates. Eric could describe a future so clearly that people began paying for it before the foundation existed. Marian loved his confidence. She also recognized its danger. "Our son thinks belief should count as collateral," she told me after he asked for money to open his first cafe. The cafe lasted 18 months. Eric blamed the location, his partner, and a landlord who refused to delay rent. He repaid $6,000 of the $20,000 we lent him, then treated the remaining balance as something parents should forget. Marian did not forget. She wrote each payment in a small green ledger and stopped asking after Eric whisked 12 months. The ledger stayed in our desk, though she never mentioned it during family dinners. "Knowing is enough," she said. Marian died from an aneurysm at 63. There was no long illness, final instruction, or orderly transfer of the household. She left for a morning walk and collapsed beside a neighbor's driveway before the ambulance arrived. Eric was 39. For almost a year, grief made us gentler with each other. He called every evening, drove me to appointments, and helped sort insurance forms that arrived with deadlines I could barely read. I trusted him with documents. That trust became part of the loan years later. 3 years after Marian died, Eric announced that he had found the right restaurant property. The building had brick walls, a large corner kitchen, and an old freight entrance facing the alley. He called the concept Copper Table. The name came from a copper serving tray Marian had inherited from her mother. Eric said the restaurant would honor her habit of feeding everyone who entered our house. Grief makes a convincing investor. I contributed $32,000 from savings, structured as a documented loan because Marian's green ledger had taught me that memory and money require separate records. Eric signed a 5-year repayment schedule without objecting.
I also gave him labor. The building's electrical service needed replacement before inspection. I could no longer perform commercial work under my retired status, so I introduced Eric to Alvarez Electric, where 2 former apprentices now managed field crews. They charged fairly. I spent 6 weeks helping Eric read bids, plan equipment loads, and separate necessary work from decorative ideas. I gave him my retired drill press, a set of conduit benders, and the rolling cabinet for my garage. He sold the drill press before opening. Restaurants do not need machine tools, he said when I noticed. Then why did you ask for it? I needed flexibility. The sale brought $1,200. He spent nearly $4,000 on imported pendant lights 2 weeks later because a designer said they would define the dining room. That should have warned me. Instead, I told myself his business required choices I did not understand. Parents often rename evidence when respecting an adult child becomes easier than questioning him. Copper Table opened on a Thursday in May. The first months were promising. Local reviewers liked the food, office workers filled lunch tables, and Eric remembered every regular customer's name. He stood near the entrance wearing dark shirts and made the room feel like a private gathering. I was proud of him. Every Sunday, he sent sales figures and photographs of full tables. He made the first 9 payments on our loan exactly when promised. Then the figures stopped arriving. Eric said the bookkeeping software had changed. The monthly payment arrived 7 days late, then 16, then disappeared beneath a conversation about winter repairs. I asked once in writing. He answered with a photograph of the dining room during a busy Friday night and wrote, "This is what your money built." The message contained pride and deflection in equal measure. I saved it. During the restaurant's second year, Eric added a private dining room without waiting for operating cash. He borrowed from a supplier, delayed payroll taxes, and signed an equipment lease carrying a rate that made my stomach tighten. I learned those facts gradually. One former apprentice called because Alvarez Electric had 2 unpaid invoices. A produce supplier asked whether I remained involved with the business. Eric began moving money between weeks, paying whichever creditor had become loudest. When I confronted him, he called the shortage temporary. "We need one strong season," he said, "then everything levels out. Strong seasons do not repair weak controls. You wired buildings, you did not run hospitality." He was correct about my profession. He was wrong about arithmetic. 6 months before the forged guarantee, Eric asked me to co-sign a commercial line of credit. He brought projected sales, expansion plans, and a letter from a restaurant consultant who expected higher margins after menu changes. The proposal requested $150,000. I read every page. The new money would cover old supplier balances, tax obligations, and operating losses, while funding another renovation intended to attract private events. It solved yesterday before purchasing tomorrow. "No," I said. Eric stared as though I had failed to understand the question. "The building has equity. You lease the building. The business has value. The business cannot pay current bills." His voice hardened. "You have investments sitting untouched. They are funding my retirement. You spend less than half your income." I heard Marion's warning inside his calculation. Eric had stopped seeing security as something I earned and begun seeing unused capacity that belonged to the family project. "I will help you review costs," I said. "I will not guarantee debt." He left without taking the projections. I placed them inside the desk with Marion's ledger. For several months, Eric mentioned no loan. He became attentive again, bringing groceries, asking about my furnace, and inviting me to the restaurant after closing. I wanted to believe the refusal had settled something. It had only changed his method. The certified envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning. Its return address belonged to Harbor Community Bank, an institution where I held no account. Inside was a notice welcoming me as guarantor for a commercial loan of $180,000 to Copper Table Hospitality, LLC. The notice described my right to copies and listed the scheduled funding date 8 days later. I read the first paragraph twice, then called Eric and asked for the complete packet without explaining what had arrived. He invited me to Copper Table before dinner service. That was when he placed the loan between the empty glasses and told me a real father signs. He expected retroactive approval because the forged signature had already carried him through underwriting. I left with the packet. At home, I called the number printed on the bank's public website rather than the number inside the letter. A commercial service representative confirmed the loan number and asked me to verify the telephone used during underwriting. The final 4 digits were unfamiliar. "I did not apply for this," I said. The representative stopped reading from her script. "Mr. Bennett, please remain on the line." 6 minutes later, a fraud officer named Dana Kim joined the call and asked whether I possessed the guarantee packet, the complete copy. "Do not contact the borrower again," she said. "We need to preserve the application and verification records." I looked toward the framed photograph of Eric and Marion beside the copper tray.
"The borrower is my son." Dana paused. "The relationship does not change the first step." That was the first useful sentence anybody gave me. Dana instructed me to place the original packet inside a clean envelope, avoid writing on any page, and bring it to the bank the following morning. I had already touched everything. "That is expected," she said. "Keep it in the condition you have now." Her calm voice made the situation feel procedural, which somehow made the betrayal more real. Family conflict can be argued into fog, but procedure requires dates, names, and actions that remain attached to whoever performed them. I photographed the packet before sealing it. Then I opened Marion's desk. The green ledger remained beneath our insurance policies, with Eric's old cafe loan recorded across 3 pages. 9 payments appeared in Marion's blue handwriting, 4 more appeared in mine. The final balance was $14,000. I had stopped requesting it after her death because collecting from Eric felt like extending an argument she could no longer finish. He had interpreted silence differently. To Eric, an uncollected debt became proof that family money carried no real boundary. The missing consequence from one agreement trained him to treat another agreement as something a father should absorb. That realization embarrassed me. It also clarified the work ahead. I placed the ledger beside the sealed loan packet, then called Frank Ruiz, a retired foreman who had worked beside me for 26 years. Frank answered during a baseball game and complained before saying hello. If this is about the memorial breakfast, I already ordered the sausage. Where was I on March 12th at 10 in the morning? The television volume lowered. At the hall, reading Danny Mercer's name. Why? A loan document says I signed it elsewhere. Frank remained silent for several seconds. How large? 180,000. Whose loan? Eric's. Another silence followed, this one carrying judgment that Frank was kind enough to withhold. What do you need? He asked. That question separated him from my son. Frank did not tell me what a loyal father, angry man, or proud electrician should do. He asked which part of the load he could carry without taking control of the circuit. A statement about the memorial, I said. Names, times, and who saw me. You will have it before breakfast. At 7 the next morning, Frank arrived with a signed statement, the printing memorial program, and a photograph showing me at the lectern. The wall clock behind my shoulder read 10:14. He also brought coffee. We sat at my workbench beneath my father's tool roll while I explained the guarantee. Frank read the amount and whistled without making a sound. Did Eric ask first? 6 months ago. I refused. Does the bank know that? They will. Frank tapped the sealed envelope once. Then make them write it down. He drove me to Harbor Community Bank because my hands had begun tightening around the steering wheel whenever I imagined Eric at the restaurant. We said little during the trip. Dana met us beside the commercial lending floor with the bank's counsel and an investigator named Marcus Hill. Frank remained in the lobby until somebody needed his statement. The conference room contained no dramatic machinery. A scanner, 2 laptops, and a box of evidence sleeves occupied one end of the table. Dana opened the packet while I watched. Page 1 identified Copper Table Hospitality LLC as borrower. Page 14 identified me as unlimited personal guarantor. The application listed my house, retirement accounts, pension income, and investment balance within 5% of the real amounts. Someone had done homework. The attached driver's license copy came from the insurance folder Eric helped me organize after Marianne died. I knew because the photograph showed a small cut above my eyebrow from replacing a storm-damaged service line that same week. The signature looked adequate until compared with bank records. Legal documents carried my middle initial, and every H began below the baseline because my wrist turned inward after an old ladder injury. The forged signature omitted the initial and began perfectly level. It copied letters. It missed habit. Marcus asked me to sign 3 blank sheets using the same pen. I wrote my full name slowly, then at normal speed, and watched the H fall below the line each time. Did Eric possess examples? Tax forms, birthday cards, checks, insurance papers, and the loan agreement from his first cafe. Did he have permission to use your identifying information for this application? No. Did anybody? No. Dana produced the bank's contact history. The guarantee application had changed my telephone number 2 days before a required verification call. The replacement number belonged to a prepaid mobile account opened under a business email associated with Copper Table. The bank had called that number. Somebody answered. Dana placed a small speaker on the table and asked whether Frank wanted present. I said yes because hearing another man occupy my name felt larger than a private financial detail. Frank entered and sat beside me. The recording began with an automated notice that the call might be monitored. A verification employee introduced herself, asked for Howard Bennett, and received a confident answer. Speaking. The voice was male, perhaps 30 years younger than mine, with a softness around certain consonants that I recognized without finding the name immediately.
The employee asked for my date of birth. The man answered correctly. She asked for the address of the guaranteed property, the final digits of my social security number, and the approximate value of the investment account listed as support. Every answer matched. Then she described the guarantee. Do you understand that Harbor Community Bank may pursue your personal assets if Copper Table Hospitality LLC defaults? The stranger paused for less than 1 second. Yes, I understand. Are you signing voluntarily and without pressure from the borrower? Absolutely. The word revealed him. Nolan Hayes, Eric's general manager, used absolutely in nearly every answer. I had heard him say it while discussing invoices, reservations, and broken freezer during the restaurant's first year. I asked Dana to play the final exchange again. She did. Absolutely. Frank's chair moved closer. You know him? Marcus asked. I believe the voice belongs to Nolan Hayes. He manages Copper Table. Belief was the honest word. Recognition can guide an investigation, but it should not become proof merely because pain makes certainty attractive. Marcus wrote the name without changing his expression. Dana saved my identification as a lead and continued the recording. The employee asked whether the bank could contact me at the same number before funding. Nolan agreed,
thanked her, and ended the call after 4 minutes and 23 seconds. My life had been summarized in 4 minutes. Birth date, address, account value, consent. The facts sounded ordinary until attached to the wrong voice. Then each one became a tool carried into my house without permission. I felt pressure climb from my stomach into my throat. Frank placed both palms flat on the table, giving me something steady to mirror. I breathed until the room returned to its correct size. Dana turned off the speaker. "The bank is suspending the loan," she said. "No funds will be released while fraud is investigated." That protected the money. It did not yet protect my credit because the application and inquiry remained attached to my identity until the bank completed its internal correction. We moved one fact at a time. I signed an affidavit stating that I never applied, guaranteed, authorized, or received proceeds from the loan. Dana attached my signature samples, Frank's memorial evidence, and the prior written refusal that Eric had left on my desk. I had saved his projections. I had also written one word across the first page after our meeting. Declined. The date beside it fell 6 months before the fraudulent application. My handwriting could not prove what Eric heard, but it supported the history I described. Marcus asked if I had sent any written refusal. I searched my phone and found a message from that evening. "I will review costs with you. I will not guarantee restaurant debt." Eric had replied with one word. "Fine." The word changed the case. The fraud could no longer be explained as a son misunderstanding broad parental support. Eric had received a specific refusal, acknowledged it, and later submitted the same type of guarantee under my name. Intent moved from inference toward evidence. Marcus copied the exchange through the bank's evidence process. Then he asked me to describe every document Eric accessed after Marion's death and every person who knew my financial balances. The list was short. Eric, my investment advisor, my tax preparer, me. Nolan could not have answered those questions without help from someone holding the folder or information copied from it. I wanted to call Eric immediately. I wanted him to hear the recording before I had to carry it alone for another hour. I wanted one honest reaction that existed before he built a defense. Frank saw my hand move toward the phone. "What would the call give you?" "An answer." "You have one." He pointed toward Eric's message. "Fine." That was when restraint stopped feeling like delay and became control. Eric had spent months arranging facts around a decision I never made, so I would not donate the warning he needed to rearrange them again. I put the phone away. Marcus contacted the city's financial crimes unit, while Dana began the bank's identity correction and preservation process. The detective assigned to the referral would need records, interviews, and legal authority the bank did not possess. No shortcut appeared. That mattered because easy punishment would have made the story less true. A bank can stop its money. It cannot manufacture an arrest because a customer feels betrayed. Evidence had to travel. I was prepared to travel with it. Lena Brooks called that afternoon and scheduled my interview for the next morning, allowing enough time for Harbor to copy its records through formal channels. She worked from a municipal building that looked older than most crimes committed inside it. The interview room had painted concrete walls, a metal table, and a camera mounted high in one corner. Frank waited outside. Lena asked me to begin before the certified envelope arrived, because financial crimes often depend on the history that makes unauthorized access possible. I described Marion's death, Eric's help with insurance papers, the restaurant loan, my refusal, and the packet on page 14. She interrupted whenever I assigned motive. "How do you know he believed your investments were available? He said they were sitting untouched. Do you have that statement recorded?" "No." "Then it supports your memory, not the charge."
I respected her immediately. Lena accepted documents only after identifying their source, date, and chain of custody. She copied the certified notice, prior projections, text refusal, memorial program, photograph, and bank affidavit. The forged packet remained with Harbor under its preservation protocol until investigators obtained it properly. "What do you want to happen?" she asked. "I want my name removed from the debt. The bank controls that. I want the person who did this unable to call it a family arrangement. Evidence controls that. I want my son held responsible." Lena nodded once. "The law controls that part, and the facts determine which law reaches him." Her answer contained no promise. That made it useful. Harbor completed its preliminary identity determination 2 days later, and Dana sent a signed letter confirming that I had no obligation under the proposed guarantee, the bank would report no debt under my name, and the associated credit inquiry was being removed. The loan remained suspended. My retirement was safe. I stood beside my mailbox reading the letter while afternoon traffic moved beyond the hedge. Nothing visible had changed. Yet the house behind me no longer sat beneath a debt created by somebody else's voice. That was the first consequence.
It belonged to protection, not punishment. Before I explain why the bank allowed Eric to reach closing, drop a comment telling me where help should have ended in this story. A boundary becomes real when the person who crossed it finally meets a consequence they cannot rename. Lena called an hour after the letter arrived. Harbor's records had produced 3 leads that could be verified without depending on my recognition of Nolan's voice. The prepaid number was purchased online using Copper Table's business debit card. The verification call originated through that phone from a network serving the restaurant office, and the loan broker had received every supporting document from Eric's business email. The path narrowed. Lena interviewed Nolan at the restaurant while another detective spoke with Eric separately. Both men initially described the guarantee as something I had approved informally. That story failed against my text refusal. Nolan asked for an attorney. 2 days later, through counsel, he offered a recorded statement and access to messages exchanged with Eric. His cooperation did not erase his conduct, and the prosecutor made no immediate promise regarding charges. It gave investigators a second witness. According to Nolan, Eric bought the prepaid number, provided my identity answers, and rehearsed the verification questions inside the restaurant office. Nolan understood that he would claim to be Howard Bennett for several minutes. Eric paid him $2,000 described in the bookkeeping system as a management bonus. One message from Eric stated the purpose without decoration. Use the new number. Say yes to every guarantee question. Dad will accept it after the money arrives. Another arrived 12 minutes before the call. Remember, Howard J. Bennett, retired electrician. Do not mention the restaurant. Eric had included my middle initial in the script while omitting it from the signature. Fraud often fails at the seam between 2 preparations. One detail is copied for speech, another for paper. And the difference exposes that neither came from the person being represented. Lena showed me printed versions of the messages after the prosecutor approved disclosure to the victim. Reading them produced less anger than the recording. The recording had invaded my voice. The messages revealed design. Eric expected forgiveness after funding because the bank's money would convert his crime into a family emergency. If he reported him, employees might lose jobs and the restaurant might close. He believed consequence would make his refusal feel crueler than his deception. That was his leverage. He had placed the moral cost of stopping him on the person whose name he stole. For 2 nights, I barely slept. Copper Table employed 23 people, including cooks, servers, and dishwashers who knew nothing about the guarantee. Blocking a loan might accelerate the restaurant's failure. Allowing it would transfer that failure toward my house. The choice felt brutal until Frank corrected the frame while we sat in his truck outside the Union Hall. "You are not closing the restaurant," he said. "Eric created bills the restaurant cannot pay. The loan might keep people working. For how long?" I had no honest answer. The projections assumed sales growth that had never occurred, ignored overdue taxes, and treated old supplier balances as though they would disappear after refinancing. The money delayed collapse. It did not repair the business. I called Dana and asked whether Harbor intended to deny the loan immediately. She explained that the bank would never fund under the fraudulent guarantee, although the borrower had not yet received final notice because investigators were preserving evidence and evaluating next steps. "We need your consent before any contact suggests you will attend," she said. "You are not required to participate." What would participation involve? Eric still expects a closing next Wednesday. The loan requires final borrower certifications and in-person verification of the guarantor. We can state truthfully that you must appear for identity confirmation. Will money be a risk? No. Funding authority has been disabled. Will Eric be arrested? That decision belongs to law enforcement. Lena answered the final question during a meeting with the prosecutor the next day. Nolan's statement, business records, recorded impersonation, forged signature, and my written refusal supported probable cause for identity fraud, forgery, and attempted theft by deception.
An arrest warrant could be requested. The prosecutor wanted Eric's final certification preserved because his loan application blamed any inaccurate information on third-party preparers. At closing, he would be asked whether he had reviewed the guarantee, supplied authentic records, and disclosed every material change. Nobody would ask him to commit a new crime. They would give him one opportunity to correct the record before acting on the warrant. If Eric disclosed the fraud, funding would remain denied, and investigators would proceed with what they already possessed. If he reaffirmed it, his own words would prevent another person from becoming the explanation. I understood the purpose. I also understood the cost. Sitting across from Eric while he confirmed my signature would mean hearing my son choose the lie after every reasonable exit had been placed in front of him. "I will attend," I said. Lena studied me. "Do not perform anger for us, Mr. Bennett. Answer only direct questions and allow the bank to control the room. I spent 41 years waiting for inspectors to tell me when a circuit was safe. Then treat this like an inspection." That instruction gave me a role I understood. We planned no speech. I would arrive through a side entrance 30 minutes before Eric. Dana would seat me in a smaller conference room until the bank completed his certifications. When called, I would identify myself, deny the signature once, and listen while the recording played.
The arrest team would wait outside the lending floor with the warrant, entering only after Lena received confirmation that Eric had appeared and reaffirmed the documents. The plan depended on ordinary doors, accurate timing, and people remaining inside their authority. That made it believable. It also made it frightening. Eric called me that evening for the first time since the restaurant meeting. His voice sounded warm, almost relieved. "The bank says you are coming Wednesday. They asked me to appear. I knew you would understand." I said nothing. "Dad, once the money lands, I can stabilize everything. You will see that I did this for the whole family." The sentence asked me to accept authorship of his excuse. "I will be at the bank," I said. That was true. He supplied the rest of the meaning himself. The 6 days before closing passed slowly, because nothing visible matched the seriousness of what had been arranged. I bought groceries, changed a furnace filter, attended a dental appointment, and sharpened 2 chisels I rarely used. Ordinary tasks kept my hands occupied. Eric sent updates as though we had resumed planning together. He forwarded a photograph of new menus, a spreadsheet showing vendors who would be paid after funding, and a message from an employee thanking him for protecting jobs. Each message moved responsibility toward me. If I refused, workers suffered. If I cooperated, Eric became the son who saved them. His fraud disappeared beneath a crisis he had allowed to grow. I forwarded everything to Lena. She asked me not to interpret the employee's message as coordination because nothing showed the employee knew about the guarantee. That limit protected an innocent person from entering a story billed by Eric. Precision again. On Monday, Dana confirmed that Harbor had removed the credit inquiry and placed a permanent identity alert on any application using my information. She also sent a list of accounts and authorizations appearing in the loan packet. 2 surprised me. Eric remained an emergency contact on my investment account from the year Marion died, and he possessed limited authority to discuss one insurance policy while helping with her claim. Neither authorization allowed transactions. Both gave him credibility when asking questions. I removed them through witnessed forms, replacing Eric with Frank for emergencies and leaving all discussion authority empty. The advisor asked whether I wanted to disinherit my son. "No," I said. "I want to stop confusing inheritance with present access." Estate decisions could wait until anger no longer controlled the pen. Access could not. Tuesday evening, I opened my father's tool roll and cleaned each piece with a cloth. The voltage tester had not been safe for live work in decades, although I kept it because its worn handle remembered both our hands. My father never promised to remove every consequence from my life. When I damaged his truck at 17, he helped me find repair work and required me to pay the bill. He stood beside me. He did not stand in front of what I had done. That distinction answered Eric's phrase about real fathers more completely than any speech I could make at the bank. I slept 5 hours. Wednesday morning arrived with rain pressing against the kitchen windows. Frank collected me at 8 and wore the same blue work jacket he had owned since retirement. "You look ready for an inspection," he said. "I feel ready for a root canal." Same chairs, worse magazines. He made me laugh. The sound felt disloyal for half a second, then human. A man can understand that his son may be arrested and still laugh inside the same morning. We reached Harbor at 8:45. Dana led us through a side entrance and into a conference room facing the parking garage rather than the lobby. Lena reviewed the rules once more. "Eric may speak to you. You may answer or remain silent. Do not block a door, touch him, or reach for documents after they are marked as evidence."
Understood. If he decides to disclose the fraud before signing, the bank stops the meeting and we proceed outside this room. Understood. If you need to leave, tell Dana. Your presence helps the bank establish identity, but the warrant does not depend on your performance. That final sentence released pressure I had been carrying since Tuesday. I was a witness, not the mechanism creating justice. At 9:11, a camera in the garage showed Eric's vehicle entering. He parked near the elevator, remained inside for 2 minutes, then emerged wearing a navy suit I had purchased for Marion's funeral. I recognized the narrow shoulders immediately. He carried a leather portfolio and walked quickly, glancing at his reflection in the elevator doors before they opened. At 9:16, the lobby receptionist notified commercial lending that the borrower had arrived. Dana left our room while Lena remained with Frank and me. We heard nothing from the main conference room. The silence created its own images. I imagined Eric shaking hands, accepting coffee, and asking whether the wire could clear before lunch. At 9:24, Dana sent Lena a message. Borrower reaffirmed application accuracy. At 9:27, another arrived. Signed final borrower certification. The exits had closed. Lena radioed the officers waiting on the floor below, confirmed that the warrant remained active, and asked Dana to begin guarantor verification. We stood. Frank gripped my shoulder once, then released it before the door opened. He would remain behind because the main room required only the parties and investigators. I carried no speech. I carried the certified envelope. Dana walked me along a corridor decorated with photographs of local businesses financed by Harbor. A bakery, machine shop, landscaping company, and family grocery store smiled from polished frames. Copper Table wanted a place among them. The bank could lend to risk. It could not lend to a person invented for 4 minutes on a prepaid phone.
Dana stopped outside Frosted Grass doors. Ready? Open it. Eric sat at the far end of the table beside a commercial loan officer and the broker who assembled his application. Several signature pages rested beneath his right hand. He smiled when he saw me. Relief appeared first, then victory. I knew you would come through, he said. I took the chair Dana indicated, placing the certified envelope in front of me without opening it. Mr. Bennett, the loan officer said, we need to confirm your identity and authorization before completing this meeting. My identity is Howard James Bennett. Did you sign the commercial guarantee dated March 12th? No. Eric smiled, disappeared. Dad, we discussed this. The loan officer raised one hand. Mr. Eric Bennett, you will have an opportunity to respond. Please allow us to complete verification. He asked whether I authorized Nolan Hayes or any other person to answer guarantee questions in my name. No. Did you provide the telephone number ending in 7391? No. Did you authorize your driver's license, investment values, or social security information for this loan? No. Eric pushed his chair back several inches. He is nervous about the wording. He approved the restaurant support. Dana entered and closed the conference room door. The sound was soft, final. She placed the bank speaker beside the certification and opened a folder containing the verification record. Eric looked toward the broker. The broker looked at the table. Before any decision is announced, Dana said, Harbor will play the call used to verify this guarantee. The recorded employee introduced herself. Then another man said my name. Eric's face changed before Nolan answered the first security question. He recognized the voice immediately, though recognition itself revealed nothing that the records had not already established. The birth date came next. Correct. Then the home address, social security digits, investment value, and confirmation that my personal assets could answer for Eric's failure. Each answer removed another place for misunderstanding to hide. When Nolan said absolutely, Eric reached toward the speaker as though ending the playback could return the call to secrecy. Dana moved it beyond his hand. That recording is a preserved bank record, she said. Nolan handled the application, Eric replied. He must have changed something. The sentence arrived too quickly. He did not ask whose voice we heard, why Nolan possessed my identity, or which part of the guarantee had changed. Eric selected a responsible person before the recording finished. The loan officer stopped the audio after the final confirmation. Mr. Bennett, did Nolan Hayes prepare this application without your direction? Eric looked toward me. Dad, tell them we discussed support. We discussed it. Relief flickered across his face. I refused, I continued. You acknowledged the refusal in writing. Dana placed a copy of our exchange beside his final certification. Eric read the word fine, then stared at the signature pages he had completed 20 minutes earlier. That message was months ago. Did I later agree? You knew the restaurant needed you. Did I agree? He turned toward the loan officer. He is punishing me because we argued about expenses. This is family history, not bank fraud. Dana opened another folder containing the prepaid telephone purchase, business email submissions, and the record showing $2,000 paid to Nolan after verification. She did not reveal every investigative message because the bank only part of the evidence. She revealed enough to explain its decision. Harbor has determined that the guarantee was fraudulent, she said. The loan is denied, no funds will be dispersed, and Howard Bennett has no obligation connected to this application.
Eric stood. You cannot destroy 23 jobs over paperwork. Sit down, the loan officer said. Dad, fix this. There it was again. He had forged my name, recruited my voice, and built a debt against my home, yet responsibility for the collapse still crossed the table toward me. I opened the certified envelope and removed the notice that had found the correct address after every false contact had done its work. A father can stand beside his son, I said. He cannot sign beneath what his son chose. Eric stared at me. You would let them take me? The question assumed I controlled the people waiting beyond the room. It assumed parenthood could cancel evidence after the evidence reached somebody else's authority. I told the truth, I said. What follows belongs to your choices. Dana opened the door. Lena entered with 2 officers and identified herself. She told Eric that a warrant had been issued for his arrest, stated the allegations, and instructed him to place his hands where they could be seen. For 1 second, he remained standing behind the chair. Then his shoulders lowered. The officer secured his wrists, checked the cuffs, and allowed him to retrieve nothing from the table. His leather portfolio stayed beside the signed certification as evidence. No employee watched. No dining room applauded. My son crossed a carpeted lending floor between 2 officers while bank employees kept their distance from the corridor. The elevator doors closed without ceremony. I sat down after he disappeared. My legs had begun shaking. Lena returned 5 minutes later and reminded me that arrest meant an allegation had entered formal process, not that a courtroom had already decided every fact. Do you have somewhere to go? She asked. Frank is waiting. Good. That single word carried more care than any promise of punishment could have offered. Dana collected the closing documents, marked the loan denied, and gave me a copy of the bank's final identity letter. Across the guarantee, she stamped void, unauthorized signature, in red ink. The stamp covered part of my forged name. The sight felt less satisfying than I expected. A document can be corrected in 1 morning, while a relationship altered by that document requires a different measure of time. Frank stood when I entered the smaller room. Is it done? The loan is dead. Eric was arrested. He took my coat without asking another question, and we left through the same employee entrance before reporters or restaurant staff learned anything. Rain had stopped. On the drive home, Frank discussed the Union Hall's broken griddle and whether 6 pounds of sausage would feed the memorial committee. He gave my mind ordinary objects to hold until the image of the elevator became less sharp. That was friendship. It did not demand a statement while the wound remained open. At home, I placed the voided copy on my workbench beneath my father's tool roll. The red stamp looked almost violent against the white paper, although the room remained painfully calm. I removed my watch. My wrist carried a shallow mark where the band had pressed during the closing. I had spent hours controlling my hands while my body recorded every minute through tightened muscles, dry mouth, and a pulse that refused to settle. The arrest had protected nobody from grief. It had only placed responsibility where grief could no longer move it. Frank heated soup in my kitchen and left without asking whether I regretted cooperating. Before closing the door, he wrote his telephone number on the back of a hardware receipt, even though I already knew it. Call anyway. I sat beside the workbench until evening, reading the guarantee from beginning to end. Eric had copied my address, savings, work history, and signature, yet none of those facts explained the man whose name appeared on the page. A name contains more than identifiers. It contains every refusal, duty, mistake, and promise the owner accepted while carrying it. Eric had borrowed the shell and expected the life inside it to follow. It did not. The criminal process lasted 11 months, while Nolan's cooperation, the recorded call, application records, forged guarantee, business payment, and Eric's final certification formed a consistent chain that did not require a jury to choose between father and son based on emotion. Eric initially pleaded not guilty and told relatives that Nolan had exceeded instructions, while I withdrew support after the restaurant was already committed. Those claims weakened as messages, bank records, and my written refusal entered discovery. Eventually, Eric pleaded guilty to felony charges arising from identity fraud, forgery, and the attempted fraudulent loan. The court imposed a custodial sentence, restitution for documented losses, and restrictions preventing him from using my identity or contacting financial institutions on my behalf. I did not ask the judge for the maximum punishment. I did not ask for leniency. My victim statement described the precise harm, risk to retirement assets, misuse of identifying information, cost of professional protection, and the loss of trust created when my son treated consent as an obstacle. The court needed facts. My grief belonged elsewhere. Copper Table never received a loan. Eric's attorney and a restructuring professional attempted to sell the operating business, though overdue taxes and supplier claims exceeded what a buyer would assume. The restaurant closed 6 weeks after the arrest, and employees received final wages through available accounts and the formal wind-down process, while several found work through other restaurants before the doors closed. I made introductions for 2 electricians who would maintain the building.
I did not fund payroll. That refusal generated another round of family judgment. And Anne said innocent workers were suffering because I wanted to teach Eric a lesson. The restaurant was insolvent before I received the envelope, I told her. My house was never its rescue plan. She disagreed. I ended the call. Boundaries become quieter after repetition because the person setting them stops presenting every decision for appeal. The week after closing, I reviewed every remaining connection bearing Eric's name. Frank accompanied me to the investment office, insurance agency, credit bureau, and county records desk. We removed emergency access, discussion authority, stored identification copies, and outdated permissions from Marion's estate work. I froze my credit, added verbal passwords to financial accounts, and required in-person confirmation for any future guarantee. No single form felt dramatic. Together, they returned authorship. I also met with my estate attorney. Anger wanted to erase Eric immediately, although I refused to make a permanent inheritance decision while the criminal case remained active. We created safeguards instead. Any future benefit would pass through an independent trustee. No beneficiary would receive authority over my accounts, and every medical or financial role required a separate person with documented consent. Love could remain. Control could not. Eric wrote from custody 4 months after sentencing, and the first letter blamed Nolan, the bank, market conditions, and my unwillingness to understand what entrepreneurship requires. I finished the letter once, then stored it beside Marion's green ledger, where unpaid promises and revised explanations could occupy the same drawer without controlling my next decision. His second letter arrived 2 months later and contained one sentence I had waited to hear. You said no, and I decided your no did not count. I believed that sentence. Belief was not reconciliation. I replied that I would accept written communication and consider a supervised visit when his counselor believed it appropriate. I would not provide money, manage his debts, contact the court, or describe accountability as abandonment. He did not answer for several weeks. That silence no longer frightened me enough to purchase relief. The bank returned the original guarantee after the case concluded, retaining its certified evidentiary copies in the final record. The red void stamp remained across the signature, and a small evidence label marked every person who had handled the page.
I placed it inside a fireproof box, not as a trophy, as a record. Marion's green ledger went beside it after I wrote one final line beneath Eric's old cafe balance. Closed without payment. Boundary preserved elsewhere. The following Saturday, I arrived at Local 38 before sunrise carrying eggs, coffee, bread, and the replacement part Frank ordered for the griddle. Luis Ortega had already opened the kitchen, while Calvin Price argued that nobody needed fruit at a union breakfast. Doctors disagree. Doctors do not cook here. We repaired the griddle before heating it, because electricians remain incapable of ignoring damaged connections even when breakfast is waiting. Frank checked the thermostat. Louise cleaned the contacts. I tightened one terminal and replaced a cracked length of insulation. Then the surface warmed evenly. Men arrived in work jackets carrying newspapers, hot sauce, and stories they had repeated for 20 years. Some knew what Eric had done. Others knew only that I had experienced a family problem and needed company that did not require explanation. Nobody asked about my investment balance. Nobody called security unused. They asked whether the eggs needed more salt, whether the coffee could remove paint, or whether Frank had ordered enough sausage after complaining for an entire week. I stood behind the serving counter with a spatula in my hand while morning light entered through the high windows. My father's old tool roll remained at home above the workbench, yet the lesson inside it had followed me. A tool remembers the hand. A name should remember the person. Eric had used mine as collateral because he believed fatherhood made access permanent. The men in that hall used my name only when they wanted me to pass a plate, settle an argument, or sit down before the food disappeared. "Howard," Frank called, holding an empty cup. "You planning to drink all that coffee yourself?" I filled his cup. Then I filled mine and took the chair beside him. The account was closed. The guarantee was void. The criminal case had reached its result, but none of those outcomes created the peace I felt at that table. Peace came from belonging where my usefulness did not purchase my seat.
I stayed at that table longer than the coffee required. The hall had begun as a place where men brought broken equipment, unpaid invoices, and problems that needed a second set of eyes. It had become something more important, a room where nobody confused assistance with ownership. A person could carry a heavy thing for someone else without handing over the keys to his entire life. For years, I had treated every request from Eric as a test of love. If he needed a signature, I called it support. If he needed money, I called it patience. If he needed an answer immediately, I called my own discomfort selfishness. The vocabulary changed, but the result remained the same. He learned that pressure could make my boundary look like a moral failure. That lesson did not disappear because a judge read the charges aloud. It did not disappear because the bank stamped the guarantee void, or because the family stopped asking me to reconsider. I had to notice the old reflex each time it returned. A message could still make my hand reach for the phone. An envelope could still make my chest tighten. The difference was that I no longer mistook the feeling for an instruction. I kept the fireproof box closed. I kept the passwords private. I kept the written refusal with the other records, not because I expected another forged document, but because memory becomes unreliable when affection edits the facts. The page reminded me that I had said no before the crisis became visible. It reminded me that a clear answer does not require an audience to agree with it. There would be people who called that cold. Some would say a father should leave a door open no matter how often somebody enters with permission. I had left a door open for conversation. I had not left my accounts, my signature, or my house unlocked. Those were different decisions, and keeping them separate was the first honest kindness I had offered myself in years. Eric remained my son. That sentence carried history, grief, and a limit. It did not authorize him to become my creditor, my representative, or the owner of my future. I could hope he learned the difference between regret and accountability without paying for the lesson again. I could remember the boy who repaired bicycles and still refuse the man who forged a guarantee. Both memories were true. Neither one could sign for me. Frank nudged my cup toward the sugar and complained that I was thinking too hard before breakfast. I laughed because he was right. The room smelled of coffee, hot metal, and toast. Nothing in it looked like a courtroom. Nothing in it demanded that I prove what kind of father I was. I had spent months believing that the family name was something I needed to defend. At that table, I understood that a name is also a boundary. It tells the world who may speak for you, who may borrow your history, and who must ask before turning your life into collateral. I had taken mine back quietly, one refusal and one ordinary morning at a time. I left the hall with no announcement and no final argument. The day continued in small tasks, a locked door, a clean cup, and a receipt folded in my pocket. Those tasks did not erase what happened. They proved that a life can continue without asking the person who caused the damage to approve the terms. If this story meant something to you, subscribe and tell me which boundary returned your name to you. A real family can survive the word no, and any relationship that requires your surrender was already charging too much.